Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 125 Samurai Pyro build. So this is going to be using the Sacred Nagakiba as well as a Finger Seal to cast our Pyromancies. This is primarily a Faith build, so we'll be putting 60 points into Vigor, 22 into Endurance, 26 into Dexterity, 18 into Strength, and then 50 into Faith. Our Faith stat is actually at 48, but we have 2 points coming from the Halig Tree Night Helm. We'll also be wearing the Crucible Tree Armor, the Tree Sentinel Gauntlets, and the Tree Sentinel Greaves, and that gives us 71 poise, which gets us above the 69 poise breakpoint, which is pretty common. We'll be using the Shard of Alexander to boost our Ashes of War, the Phlox Canvas Talisman to boost our incantations, Urchi's Favor +2, and Crimson Amber Medallion to boost stamina, equip load, and HP. Because our Nagakiba is going to be Sacred Infused, we can use the Holy Shrouding Crack tier to boost our holy damage, and then we'll also use the Crimson Bubble tier to restore our HP when we're close to death. The moveset for this build is going to be pretty fun. We have access to the high poise damage attack of Catch Flame, which comes out and hits for 97 poise, which is a lot. And then we can also switch to two-handing our Nagakiba, which is going to give us a little bit more poise damage. So if you are struggling to poise damage your opponent and stun lock them, switching from the one-handed moveset to the two-handed might be a good option, and remembering that you have Catch Flame in your offhand is going to be a good call. We'll also be able to switch to Stone of Garang, so that's not necessarily a pyromancy, but I feel like it's a really fun incantation, so I enjoy using it. And then we also have access to Giant Flame Take Thee, and if we want, we can switch over to our Giant Seal, and that will improve the damage associated with this particular incantation because it is a Giant's Flame type incantation, which is boosted by this particular seal. One fun combo that we'll be going for is going to be the Catch Flame into Unsheath. So you do need to delay Unsheath just a little bit, but it is possible to get a nice roll catch with the Unsheath, and due to the Nagakiba's long range, it will put you in a pretty good spot to land that. So you can go for Catch Flame into either the heavy attack or the light attack with the Unsheath Ash of War, and both are pretty effective. It takes a little while to get the timing down, but if you do land it, it'll be for quite a bit of damage. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about the build, moveset, and strategy we'll be employing. If you have any questions, definitely let me know in the comments, and if you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into the invasions and arena content. Alright, so jumping into our first invasion, we have a host on a branch. So I naturally go for a free aim with the Giant's Flame Take. They do hit the host, but somehow don't manage to knock them off, so a little bit rough there, but that's alright. I begin the chase down on the branch and kind of meet up with both the Phantom and the host. So here we have a player going for the Lion's Claw Ash of War with the Ultra Great Sword, and that's a little bit rough. It can land a whole bunch of damage if it hit, but I managed to land my Ash of War Unsheath just a little bit more quickly, and somehow the kind of animation of Lion's Claw missed. So that was kind of a weird moment where my animation negated kind of the damage associated with their Ash of War, and just my movement was a little bit weird. And I think you can have that interaction sometimes, especially with Unsheath, where your body kind of ducks a little bit and then they'll miss with their either slash. So in some cases you might be able to like duck an attack while you're in the Unsheath animation. I've had it happen to me mostly against Moonveil since it is the same animation, but it's just kind of an odd moment there and one that kind of worked in my favor. So I am able to kill this blue that was AFK. That's something that I've seen more and more these days, that blues that just spawn into the world AFK. And once I've kind of gotten a couple incantations and hits off on this opponent, I do go for a backstab while they're in that Radon animation. And it's definitely useful to take advantage of kind of that slow wind up associated with the second part of the animation. I do have a little bit of a weird connection, so you can see there's a delay with that hit, but I get in a couple quick attacks with the Nagakiba and do manage to land just a running attack for like 1 HP. So next up we have a 2v1, and these players are maybe unaware of my spawn in iframe, so I'm able to get an Unsheath off real quick. And then we do have a player using Bloodhound Step, but the kind of wide sweep associated with the Nagakiba is great for catching players that are kind of Bloodhound stepping around you. And then this player, I feel like I'd be able to bait into a parry, so I go for that attempt and just a quick weapon swap over to the Misericord for a riposte and manage to come out on top. So that was just a real nice quick invasion where I feel like a lot of the different components of it kind of went right. Next up we have a 3v1, and this is going to involve some players that aren't really coming down. And if you don't know, there's been kind of a recent discovery associated with the Bloody Finger. So if you use that to spawn into another, or kind of respawn your location, it resets the scaling on overleveled phantoms, so they're able to do more damage. So if you weren't aware of that, I would suggest avoiding using the Bloody Finger if you can, just because overleveled phantoms have their scaling removed and they can do tons more damage. You know, they already kind of do a lot. So I was just trying to bait my opponents into coming down. Eventually they do come down. We kind of begin a process of just, you know, avoiding Moonveil attacks and utilizing the guillotines to just block some of the incoming damage, maybe block Moonveil, really trying to use the environment to my advantage, not get hit with the guillotines, and maybe hope that my opponents will. So I definitely like invading in this location. I think it's kind of fun and interesting, and just having some stage hazards in the mix can be great. So speaking of stage hazards, I am able to get Unsheath on one player, and then a zombie goes in for a hug and manages to kill that phantom. So definitely helped with the chase down in that moment. And now I'm able to focus on the blue and the host. So I am aware that the blue doesn't have a ton of health. You can see how much damage the frozen pot did. So if the frozen pot hits and it does very little damage in terms of the number, it'll always do the same proportion of health. If the number is small, then you can know that they don't have a lot of health. So it's just one way to kind of keep an eye out on the vigor that your opponents have. And, you know, if it hits for a huge number, you can probably guess that they do have quite a bit of health. So I am able to take out that blue, and then while I'm beginning the chase down on the player with Moonveil, I just kind of switch over to a parry shield, thinking that maybe this will be a good opportunity to parry this player. And then in kind of the near end of the chase down, another blue gets summoned in, so I feel like I should switch tactics. So the host goes for a heal, I land one more hit, and then divert my attention over to the blue, kind of back up a little bit, and then go for that parry that I wanted, because the dual curve sword moveset is pretty predictable to parry and, you know, fairly consistent with the land. And then I noticed that they didn't quite die from that parry and riposte, so I just used a few fan daggers to kind of take out the opponent there and to come out on top with that one-on-one little moment there. And then the chase down begins on the host here, and at this point I'm pretty sure that I just kind of want to finish it quickly, so I go for just a running heavy, which is very strong on the Nagakiba, and then follow it up with the Ash of War and manage to catch my opponent. So next up, we're going to have one of the faster 3v1s that I've encountered. So we have a player that hasn't healed, so they're at about half health, and we can do a quick vigor check with the Unsheath Ash of War, and then we have another player that is very determined to utilize their sorceries, and it's just not super effective. And then a host that also doesn't have a ton of health, so I managed to hit them with the Giant's Flame Take Thee, and they're pretty low on health, and they go for their Ash of War, and I kind of deny that with the Stone of Gronk. So I really enjoyed using Stone of Gronk. Every time I put it on a build, I feel like I wish that I would use it more. I think it's just a very fun incantation, and has pretty decent damage, as well as it comes out pretty quick, especially if you go for max cast speed and follow up one Stone of Gronk with another. They come out very, very quickly and can do lots of damage if you send a couple at your opponents. So at this point, I've noticed that I'm going to have a hard time kind of catching the player with the Dual Cestus, and I don't want to get blood loss buildup, so I try to bait them into a parry opportunity and do manage to grab that. So fist weapons are definitely strong, but they are very susceptible to parrying. And if you do have kind of that timing down and, you know, get a little bit lucky with your latency, then you should be in a good spot to at least combat that, especially if they're not insanely aggressive. So being able to, you know, switch to a parry tool is part of that process and can be somewhat difficult depending on the scenario you're in, but if you can switch over to a parry tool and take care of an opponent like that, then you'll be in a good spot. So eventually I was able to chase down the opponent with the Catch Flame, and I really like doing that out of a jump. So in this next one, we have a 3v1, and these players are really just hanging out in a small hallway, so I feel like I should chuck some rocks in their direction, and it definitely turns out to be a nice way to at least get some initial damage. And then they go for a kind of Frostbite AoE, which blocks their view of me, so I send a Frost Pot their way to try to just take advantage of the fact that they can't see me. And I throw some more stones and do manage to hit some more. You'll also note that I used Magic Fortification, so on builds at higher levels, especially Faith builds, you can kind of utilize that, and I found that to be really nice to have, especially with the frequency I encountered in Moonveil. So we have a host here that was hitting me with Moonveil. With Magic Fortification, I definitely would have died, or without it rather, I would have died. So having it on the build was super useful. And then here I just go for a very quick turn and burn with the Unsheath Ash of War, and it's so useful for really aggressive players to just kind of turn around and hit them with that. And if they're not prepared, they'll definitely kind of die in the process. And then here I definitely didn't really need to go for as many parry attempts as I went for, and my timing wasn't quite right. I'm not sure if there's a slight latency issue, so I went for one there and didn't manage to hit it. But the nice thing about trying to parry Moonveil, especially if you have something like Magic Fortification that means that the amount of damage you're taking is less, is that you still get the little daggers that fly up, and so those end up being the kind of determining factor in that host's lifespan there. So definitely a fun 3v1 that got a lot of Stone of Gronk action, which always makes me happy. So next up we have a 2v1, and I wasn't super sure what the terrain was like in this area. I wasn't sure if I could fall off these kind of rocks and survive. In kind of hindsight, it looks very obvious that, yeah, you can kind of roll down and you won't die to your death, but you can't really always be sure, and when you're trying to pay attention to other players, it can be difficult to determine that. So I'm kind of staying in this small area, and then eventually I do get a good view of kind of the area around me and realize that I can get into a more open space, and that ends up being pretty useful. Having a little bit more room to maneuver is going to be pretty helpful, and there you can see a nice quick turn and burn with the Unsheath Ash of War is enough to take care of that Phantom, and it has just so much range with the Nagakiba, which is great. And then I begin kind of a one-on-one process with the host here, and they've got an offhand dagger, which is kind of a fun moveset, I think, for having a Ultra Great Sword in their main hand. And I'm just kind of messing around with them a little bit, going for ravioli steps. They start going for a buff when they really don't have enough room, and I managed to hit them kind of right in the face with Giant's Flame Take Thee. So that ended up working out pretty well. They need to heal, and we're kind of back to neutral. So I'm just having kind of fun with the incantations that I've got. So I throw some stones in their direction, go for kind of a neutral jump attack in case they want to stay aggressive, and go for some free aims as well with the Stone Gronk, and do manage to get just a little bit of extra range on that Unsheath Ash of War and throw one more rock that manages to kind of hit them in the face and win that invasion. So next up we have a 2v1, although it functioned more as a 1v1 followed up by another 1v1. And I go for Giant's Flame Take Thee pretty early on. It's kind of a nice way to surprise your opponents, and you can absolutely use that to one-shot people. This build isn't centered around making that incantation as powerful as it could be, and I'm not always, fully charging it, but if you do fully charge it, you can hit for pretty huge numbers. So I wanted the Nagakiba to be, pretty present in this build, and also to be utilizing more of the Catch Flame and Unsheath combo, but the Giant's Flame Take Thee in the context of invasions is very strong, especially in ganks where people are really aggressive. And speaking of which, that opponent, hit me with Madness. They managed to proc it and then went for the running heavy attack. Only got the first 2 hits, which didn't manage to stun lock me, and then I was able to kind of roll out of that and hit them for their last damage. So definitely they were a little bit overly aggressive when they should have kind of backed off and healed, despite the fact that they had the advantage. I think sometimes utilizing that advantage is pretty helpful. And here we can see that combo I was just talking about, where we have the Catch Flame into Unsheath. So just delaying that follow-up Unsheath attack can be pretty useful. Obviously, your opponent's roll timing is going to determine whether or not you're going to be able to land it. And going for the light attack can be a little bit more predictably landed, I would say, and more confidently landed, but it's more damaging to use the heavy attack, so I usually utilize that, but occasionally I would go for kind of the horizontal sweep. It's also a great way to kind of crowd control people. It functions similarly to the Flaming Strike Ash of War. And there we just see Giant's Flame Take Thee not only doing a decent amount of damage, but also knocking our opponent off the ledge to their death. So that kind of gets a good start on this 3v1 and turns it into a 2v1 pretty quick. Now it gets a little bit more difficult. We have the host utilizing the Reduvia Bloodblade, which is not a Ash of War that I'm such a fan of. It's very spammable and can result in blood loss buildup very quickly, and also hits for quite a lot of damage. So that was something that got buffed in one of the recent patches, and I think they may have overdone it a little bit. I would love to see just maybe some ways to balance it a little bit more, maybe like reducing the or adding some recovery frames to make it a little bit slower so you can't spam it quite as much, or maybe having the damage that it initially takes from the player that's using it be applied every single time the Ash of War is used. So currently you take a little bit of HP at the very first part of the Ash of War, but then any subsequent Bloodblade uses only take FP. But I think it would make sense to, you know, have it chip away at you slowly if you just kind of sit there and spam Bloodblade. But that's just kind of my opinion. So really what I'm trying to do here is dodge the incoming blood loss damage and find a good time to hit the Phantom. I think I may have been better off just, you know, going for the host a little bit more aggressively. The Phantom, I think, was out of heals at this point, which meant that they were playing a little bit more passively and not really protecting their host at all. And it just seemed like they wanted to find a good opportunity to come in and, you know, surprise attack me. So I was trying to, you know, chip the host a little bit, but really going for the Phantom was kind of my main goal. And you can see how that aggression on the Phantom and not the host can kind of delay these a little bit, but I was pretty certain I'd be able to get the Phantom eventually, so I kind of maybe let the pride get the better of me, which is, if you're familiar with my content, it's something that I frequently do. Will, you know, save the host for last, but eventually the Phantom does get a little bit more aggressive and they get pretty low on health, and here I'm able to kind of trade into some of the incoming damage with the host. And I'm kind of in a tight spot here because I've taken a lot of damage in the process, but having killed the Phantom, I just need to kind of wait for windows of opportunity with the host where they're stuck in their recovery frames from an attack that I'm confident enough to dodge. So I do manage to kind of find that window of opportunity, and then eventually do get more aggressive on the host there and land a guard break and riposte that finishes off the host there. So definitely a good spot to be in, and maybe a necessary chase down on the Phantom, but you know, when I do encounter 3v1s, I definitely don't want to rush in and just kill the host immediately. Next up we have a 2v1, and this was in kind of a tight spot and was just kind of difficult to maneuver in. I find that these kind of invasions, especially with a low poise damage weapon, can be pretty difficult not being able to stun lock your opponents, especially when they've got kind of a mix of attacking methods where, you know, there's some projectiles coming in, there's some high damaging sorceries being used, like Cannon of Hyema and the Gavel of Hyema. So those are definitely things to look out for, but the player with the Cannon of Hyema eventually does switch over to a stone club, and that's a weapon that I'm very familiar with. The approach of using it is going to be lots of light attack spam because the recovery frames are very, very quick, but if you can kind of get the initiative and then spend that time really, you know, utilizing the extra range of a weapon like the Nagakiba, you'll be in a good spot to finish off your opponent, and then it turns into a one-on-one that doesn't turn out to be too difficult to handle. Next up we have a 2v1, and these players, I feel like, really did not want to engage with PvP. They went all the way back to the beginning and just kind of hung out there utilizing Rivers of Blood and magic spam, so I kind of back off a little bit, get them to utilize some of their FP and try to get them to waste it in the kind of space there. I probably should have used a Frostbite Bolus here since the meter is pretty high, but I decide that it's going to be a good time to kind of go for some aggression, and here I'm able to kill the player with virtually no armor who's also frostbitten, so I know that I'm in a good spot, and then I switch over to a parry shield just because Rivers of Blood is now the only factor that I need to worry about, and that has some pretty predictable parry timing, so I felt like it made some sense to do that. And I also noticed that this particular weapon with the split damage was hitting for quite a lot with the riposte damage, so that's you know, definitely a nice thing if you don't need to switch over to a Misericord or, you know, have that in your offhand. Having that really high damaging ripostes can be pretty cool. So here I run in for a quick trade after throwing a couple rocks at my opponents, and now it's pretty much just a one-on-one. We're able to dispose of that Phantom pretty quick and just kind of take care of the blood loss build-up. I think that hosts typically stay unaggressive after their Phantoms die, and it can definitely be a mistake. I think, you know, kind of resetting to neutral as much as this host did was maybe not the right decision, because I could kind of, you know, any health or blood loss related pressure that they had in the fight, which was kind of their only advantage, it kind of dissipates pretty quickly. So eventually it just becomes a chase down and I'm able to use Catch Flame. And I really like using the jump into Catch Flame just because you can, kind of be more mobile while you're jumping. You can jump forward and use Catch Flame rather than kind of stand still and utilize the offhand incantation. So definitely a good option. I think jumping into Catch Flame and then maybe doing it one more time is going to result in more success than kind of just neutral Catch Flame movements or walking Catch Flame movements. So I'm in a spot where I'm in a 3v1, but one of the players has kind of run off and gone down that hole. And I kind of try to chase down this Phantom for quite some time, but the mage host is doing a decent job of providing cover. I do land a Giant's Flame Take Thee, which does a decent amount of damage, but then accidentally fall down this hole. So rather than trying to meet back up with the 2v1, I chase down the Phantom that I know is kind of off in the distance dispatching of PvE. And I think that was definitely a good call because I knew where the other two were. I didn't know where that Phantom was. So kind of going through the level and trying to make sure that I didn't get flanked by the one player who was, making sure that the host didn't encounter any PvE was going to be pretty helpful, I thought, in the context of this 3v1. And I think that was the right call and meant that I could kind of come back and face these players in more even terms, at least, rather than a 3v1, it's now a 2v1, and this fact that all the PvE is gone is not a huge factor. So I do land a running heavy attack on the player with the dual katanas, and then they kind of spam some light attacks, which allows me to get in a quick Unsheath Ash of War and finish off that opponent. Once we've reset to neutral and it's just me and the host, it's not too difficult to utilize just kind of Catch Flame to try to set up that combo. So there I was a little bit early with the Unsheath Ash of War, and then I missed the Catch Flame on the second attempt. I do notice that they're going for some fully charged heavies, so I'm trying to bait them into those attacks and then punish their whiff with just the light attacks of the Nagakiba, and then here I finally do grab the Catch Flame combo with Unsheath and kind of get the timing right. Wasn't totally necessary given their amount of health left, but it was kind of a fun moment there. Here we have Giant's Flame Take Thee coming in for another free aim, and this time I do manage to knock my opponent off the ledge, so I do hit the Phantom. It takes me a little while to figure out where the host is, so after looking around for a little while, I eventually realized that they were kind of right in front of me, and I go for some more Giant's Flame Take Thee free aims. But this time they ran towards me, which I thought was maybe a smart decision and definitely wasn't the one that I was expecting. And then I begin the chase down here. It's definitely important to kind of keep your eye on your target lock on and just not overuse it. So I try to turn it off in between hits or if I'm going to be rolling. And that allows me to try to be a little bit more controlled when it comes to where I do roll so I don't roll off the edge, which is definitely a problem. Next up we have just kind of a funny invasion. There's definitely nothing to really learn here. I begin going for a chase down on this Phantom, manage to grab a guard break, and they've got just a little bit of health left, so I go for a frame Frostpot, which can sometimes be a nice wake up for something like a riposte, but I do get intercepted by the PvE and get kind of blasted with Scarlet Rot, but in the process the PvE does manage to kill the host, so kind of worked out, and no hard feelings there. And I kind of go for a wave with the Phantom, just kind of acknowledging how funny that was. And next up we have a 3v1. This one was a little bit odd in kind of the coordination of these players, where they looked pretty coordinated to begin with. They were going for buffs that would kind of allow them to all be set up a little bit better for the context of this. We have Phantoms running in and kind of hosts staying back, but we do get some early hits off on this Phantom, which pretty much is enough to just kind of take care of their entire health bar. So just one running heavy attack followed up by Unsheath is, really all it takes at meta level. And even though I'm running the split damage build, it still can do quite a bit of damage. And then we do see some more of the Reduvia Bloodblade Ash of War, which is just so spammable. I need to get behind a tree to try to avoid that incoming attack. And then here the host dies while I'm going for Giant's Flame Take Thee, which knocks this other player off the ledge. So I had a lot of fun with hitting my opponents with that particular incantation. And now this last invasion was basically just parry practice. So Not too much to learn here. I go for an initial parry on this player, and then that sets me up for another parry on the host, who does have a bubble out, so I didn't get a lot of riposte damage, but then that sets me up for another parry on the Phantom, and this time it's enough to kind of, do the full damage. And then sadly, I don't get the 4th consecutive parry, go for one more whiff, and then try to set it up again. Do manage to hit it that time, and was feeling pretty good about the 4th parry. Felt like I might be in a good spot to go for at least one more, so I try to bait them into another. They are a little bit more aggressive than I'm expecting, so I get hit with a couple hits, but then finally grab one more parry, and that will do it for these Phantoms and hosts, and we're able to just kind of, feel like we're in a good spot and switch back to our incantation tool. So that concludes the invasions, and next we'll be jumping into our duels. So this first duel is going to be against a power stance Great Spear player. They definitely are somebody to kind of worry about. They have the kind of logo that indicates that they're, one of the better players in the arena. They have like the glowing gold like medallion next to their name. So definitely gotta at least respect the build that they're running and not be too aggressive or kind of overly committal to anything. So early on, I get a nice frost pot off, which is enough to at least do the frostbite damage and make sure that they take a little bit more damage with my subsequent hits. And then here I'm just trying to kind of space their attacks. Power Stance Great Spears can be very problematic to deal with if you start to panic roll a lot. So I try to look for their recovery frames as something to punish and bait them into attacks without being overly committal with anything that I do. And I do manage to land Unsheath, which is going to be a pretty big determining factor, and then utilize the speed of my weapons to hit them for just with one light attack, and that's enough to kind of win that fight. So next up we have another kind of setup that is definitely something you need to worry about, the Power Stance Straight Swords. And this is a player that also has kind of that glowing gold emblem next to their name, so somebody else that I would need to kind of worry about and respect the build of. So the jumping attacks that come out with Power Stance Straight Swords do come out a little bit later than I think most people expect, and there's some kind of common timing associated with those attacks. So the jumping attack followed up by a little bit delay, and then a neutral light attack with both weapons is going to be kind of a common theme that you'll see. So I'm really just trying to punish that and not play too aggressively, and again, not really overcommit. I think against either of these two setups, the Power Stance Great Spears or the Power Stance Straight Swords, if you really overcommit and get really aggressive, then you'll be your health bar will basically just get deleted. So I'm not really trying to kill them with those fan daggers. I'm just trying to hit them a couple times to bait them into a little bit more aggression, and eventually they do kind of turn around, and it allows me to get just another light attack to finish off the last 100 health that they had. So next up we have just a single lance user. They were going for Power Stance lances initially, but they swapped over before the invasion started, and I'm not totally sure why they made the switch in decision, but it was fine with me. I think I'd rather face the single lance than the Power Stance lances, but both are very strong, and they've also used Barbaric Roar, so if they hit me with their charged heavy or even uncharged heavy, it's going to do quite a bit of damage. I've definitely seen that do like half people's health bar, or even the full thing in some cases. So they do switch over to the Power Stance version of their build, and I'm just trying to do everything I can to avoid the incoming damage. Here I get hit with one light attack and manage to follow it up with a quick light attack of my own, and just roll out on a couple attacks and then manage to roll catch them. So again, another strong player that was utilizing a very strong build that I kind of needed to look out for incoming damage of. Next up we have a player that kind of doesn't really wave or anything and then goes for a self buff, so I want to punish that. Generally, if I see people using regen or something, I'm not a huge fan of that in the invasion context, so I do want to try to punish that, and here I'm able to grab the Catch Flame combo into Unsheath. I would use that more when I was playing against players who were less meta optimized, so players that I thought might, not one-shot me, basically. So having a little bit of extra room for error I thought was nice. So this next player was somebody that I fought twice, and we'll see them again in the next duel, but they kind of stood there and just let me come at them, which is kind of a strange approach. Eventually they did run away and I hit them with a frost pot, but the next part was kind of funny. So I was actually AFK for a second, against this player, and it was almost like I was doing the exact same thing to them, but not intentionally. So you can see that I just get hit because, you know, I'm AFK, but I do pick up my controller and actually start playing against them. I'm pretty close to being blood loss build up, so I use a Ballast just after an Ash of War, which seemed to be enough to kind of space appropriately. And then there I'm able to kind of predict their jump attack and hit them with an Unsheath. And that does quite a bit of their health, and then I managed to hit them with another Frost Pot. So I'm not sure if they were too thrilled about this, but it was definitely a fun way to kind of combat a blood loss build, and eventually I do land just a jumping light attack with that little bit of extra range. I managed to kind of clip them and finish them off. So next up we have a player with the Giant Crusher, as well as either Quick Step or Bloodhound Step. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we'll see soon enough. And they go for some looked like Bloodhound Steps back steps, so you can kind of reverse it in the same way that you might reverse a back step, and it's, you know, can be a good way to kind of catch your opponent off guard. I definitely respect them using it on the Giant Crusher, but I, you know, want to kind of mirror the silliness of their build, so I go for, you know, some more of the incantations, especially like Stone of Garunk, and also see if I can get my combo involved. So they managed to blood step away from me. I go for a backstab, and there I'm not sure if they could have grabbed a backstab. I'm surprised they didn't get the grab, honestly. But there they accidentally quick step or Bloodhound Step into Catch Flame, and that's enough to kind of finish them off. As always, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate everybody's support. And if you do have any suggestions for future builds, definitely go ahead and let me know. If you also have opinions about the meta builds that I've been running recently, if you'd like to see more at 85, I'd be happy to hear back about that. So yeah, that's all I've got, and I hope you have a good one.